Chapter 45. Fujiwara Kenyo's brother, Ryokaku Sojo, was a very angry man. There was a large zelkova tree beside his monk's quarters, so people nicknamed him Zanoki no Sojo. He didn't think this name suited him, so he cut it down. However, the stump remained, so people called him Kiriku no Sojo. He became even more angry and dug up the stump, which turned into a large moat, so he called it Horikawa no Sojo. Chapter 53. This is also a story about a priest at Ninna-ji Temple. A young boy was about to become a priest, so everyone had a farewell party. At that time, a monk got drunk and, having too much fun, picked up a nearby reed-shaped sash and put it on his head. It felt a little tight and choking, but he forced his nose into it to flatten it, put his face completely inside the tripod, and jumped out into the room to dance. Much to the amusement of everyone there. After dancing for a while, he tried to pull the tripod out, but it wouldn't come out at all. The party, which had been so much fun, suddenly turned sour, and everyone was at a loss as to what to do. Meanwhile, the skin around his neck broke and blood started to drip, and it was so swollen that he couldn't breathe and was in pain. So he tried to break the tripod, but it wasn't easy to break. When he tried to break it by banging on it, the sound echoed and was unbearable, so he couldn't smash it any further, and it was all over. A wooden stool was draped over the three legs of the tripod, which looked like they had horns because they were facing upwards, and the priest was led by one hand and the other by a walking stick to a doctor in Kyoto. On the way, people looked at him suspiciously, countless times. Now, it must have been quite strange for the priest to enter the doctor's house in Kyoto and sit across from the doctor. Whatever the priest said, his voice was muffled, and the doctor could not hear it. Such a thing is not written in the medical books, and there is no legend of a prescription for such a case. The doctor said, giving up, so the priest returned to Ninna-ji Temple empty-headedly, where his close friends and elderly mother gathered at his bedside and sat there, weeping and lamenting. But it did not seem as if the priest himself could hear their cries of grief. While this was going on, someone said to him, "Even if your ears and nose are cut and lost, why can't you not save your life? You will surely save it. Just pull out the tripod with all your strength." So he put a straw stalk around his neck, and pulled his neck hard enough to break it off, as a cushion to widen the gap between his neck and the metal tripod. Although he sustained serious injuries to his ears and nose, he was saved by a narrow escape. After that, he was bedridden for a long time, due to illness until his injuries healed. 54th chapter. There was a very cute young boy at Ninna-ji Temple, and some priests were planning to somehow lure him out to play. The priests, some of whom were talented at playing, talked together and worked hard to make something like a stylish lunchbox with partitions, which they carefully placed in an even bigger box, and buried in a convenient place in the Narabigoka, sprinkling maple leaves on top so that no one would notice. After that, they went to Ninna-ji Temple and persuaded the boy to take him out. The priests were so happy to finally have the boy out that they played around here and there. And then they all sat down in a row at the prearranged spot that was covered with moss, and was just the right place to sit. They said to each other things like, "We're so tired, oh. I wish there was an elegant person who burns maple leaves and drinks sake." As in the collected works of Bai Jui, and "You miraculous monks. Why don't you try praying for a moment?" And then they turned to the base of the tree, where they had buried the lunchbox earlier, rubbing their rosary and making all the right signs, and behaving in a very ostentatious and unnecessary way, praying for a delicious meal to appear. After doing so, they scraped the leaves off the tree, but strangely, they couldn't see anything at all. Thinking that they had buried the lunchbox in the wrong place, they searched all over Futagoka, digging everywhere. But it was nowhere to be found. The truth of the matter was that someone had seen them bury the lunchboxes and had stolen them, while the monks were returning to Ninna-ji Temple. Meanwhile, the monks who had hatched the plan had gotten into an indescribably awful fight and gone home in anger. In this way, when you try to make something too elaborate and interesting, it always ends up being boring. 68th chapter. In Tsukushi, Kyushu, there was a certain Osoryoshi. He had a long-standing habit of roasting and eating 2 radishes every morning, called suchion, as a panacea. One day, while no one was in the mansion, the enemy attacked, surrounding the mansion and attacking it. However, 2 soldiers suddenly appeared in the mansion, where no one was supposed to be, and fought without any regard for their lives, completely driving the enemy back. The Osoryoshi was very surprised and asked, "Who are these 2 people who do not usually appear in this mansion and who have fought like this?" They replied, "We are the radishes that you have relied on for a long time, and have eaten every morning, and then vanished. Such virtues can come from deep faith." Chapter 87. It really makes you realize that you need to be careful when giving sake to servants. A man lived in Uji. He had a close relationship with a hermit monk named Gukakubo, who lived in Kyoto and who still had a somewhat worldly air about him. One day, the man from Uji sent a horse to pick Gukakubo up. And Gukakubo said, "Thank you for coming all the way. Let the horseman have a drink first," and served him sake. He accepted the sake and drank it over and over again with great gusto. As he was carrying a sword and dressed in a bold manner, Gukakubo felt he could rely on him and took him with him to Uji. However, they came across Narahushi with a large number of soldier monks near Kohata, a place rumored to be frequented by bandits. The servant confronted them, saying, "They are suspicious. People walking through the mountains after dark. Stop," and drew his sword. In response, the other soldiers also drew their swords, knocked arrows on their bows, and began preparing to fight. Gukakubo realized that this was a serious situation and rubbed his hands together and pleaded with Narahushi. "This man is drunk and has no idea who he is. Please forgive him." The soldier monks then passed by, each laughing at the servant. The servant then turned to Gukakubo and said angrily, "You have done a terrible thing, monk. I am not drunk at all. I was hoping to make a name for myself by defeating the bandits. But you have wasted my drawn sword." He attacked Gukakubo repeatedly, wounding him and knocking him off his horse. After that, he yelled out, "It's bandits!" and a large group of villagers came out. "I am the bandit," he said, running around and slashing at the villagers. The large group wounded the rampaging man, restrained him, and tied him up. Covered in blood, the horse galloped back to the man's house. On the main road in Uji, at the Uji house, they were shocked and sent out many men to search for Gukakufusa, who was supposed to have been on horseback. They found him lying on the ground, groaning and unable to speak, with a gardenia hara, and put him in a palanquin and brought him to Uji. Gukakufusa managed to survive, but was seriously injured, in a cut to the back, and suffered permanent damage. Chapter 89. Someone said, "It seems that deep in the mountains, there is a monster called a nekomata that eats humans," and someone else said, "It seems that even around here, not just in the mountains, cats grow old and turn into nekomata and attack people." A priest who lived near Gyoganji Temple, who was a Renga poet and called himself Amadabutsu, heard this and thought that he should be very careful, as he walked alone on the way home from a Renga gathering. Just around that time, he had been Renga poetry until late at night somewhere, and was returning home alone. At the riverbank near his house, the rumored cat demon approached him carefully, sneaking up to his feet, and suddenly attached itself to his body, before biting into his neck. With both his heart and soul completely gone, he tried to block the cat demon's attack. But his strength was gone and he couldn't stand on his feet. He rolled into the stream and cried out, "Help me! It's a cat demon! It's a cat demon!" When people from the neighboring houses lit torches and ran over to him, they found a monk they knew from around the area. "What on earth is this?" he wondered, and when he picked him up from the river, he found that the fan and small box he had received as prizes at the Renga poetry gathering, and the things he had brought in his pocket, were soaked in water. Feeling as if he had narrowly escaped death, he went back into his house in a daze. It turns out that the Renga poet's dog had jumped on him when it heard that his master had returned, even though it was dark. 106th chapter. Shoku Shonin of Mount Koya was on his way from Kongo Ubuji to Kyoto. On a narrow road when he passed a woman on horseback. The man who was guiding the woman's horse badly led the saint's horse into a moat. The saint became very angry and reproached him, saying, "What a terrible act of disrespect." The disciples of Shiv, that is, the disciples of the Buddha, listen carefully to this. The disciples of the Buddha are divided into 4 groups. Among them, the bhikkhuni are inferior to the bhikkhuni, and the upasaka are inferior to the upasaka. It is an unprecedented misdeed for an upasaka to kick a monk like me, a monk, into a moat. The man then said, "I have no idea what you're talking about," which made the priest even